Earthworm Jim is a 1994 run-and-gun platforming video game developed by Shiny Entertainment and Playmates Interactive Entertainment and published by Sega, featuring an earthworm named Jim in a robotic suit who battles evil. Created by Doug TenNapel and designed by David Perry, the game was released for the Sega Genesis in 1994, and subsequently ported to a number of other video game consoles. The game was noted for its fluid, cartoon-like animation. It was well received by critics, and received a sequel, Earthworm Jim 2, in 1995. 15 years later, Gameloft developed a high-definition remake for the PlayStation Network and Xbox Live Arcade, titled Earthworm Jim HD, in 2010. Gameplay. The game plays as a 2D side-scrolling platformer with elements of a run-and-gun game as well. The player controls Jim and must maneuver him through the level while avoiding obstacles and enemies. The player can use Jim's gun as a method of shooting enemies, or his head as a whip for whipping enemies. The whip move also allows the player to grab hold of, and swing from, certain hooks in the game. Some levels have additional requirements beyond merely getting to the end of the level. For example, the level For Pete's Sake involves making sure the computer-controlled Peter Puppy character gets through the level unharmed, which is accomplished by whipping him to make him jump over pits, and defeating enemies before they can damage him. Failure to do so results in Peter lashing out at Jim, taking away from his health. Levels commonly culminate with a boss battle. The game incorporates a large variety of villains in the boss battles, including Psy-Crow, Queen Slug for a butt, Evil the Cat, Bob the Killer Goldfish, Major Mucus, and Professor Monkey for a head. Two villains made their only appearance in this game, Chuck, a junkyard man with a stomach bug, and Doc Duodenum, a crazed organ. In between most levels, a racing level called Asteroids is played. Unlike the rest of the game, it places the viewpoint behind Jim. The player must direct Jim on his rocket, in a race against Psy-Crow, through a tube-like structure while collecting items and boosts and avoiding asteroids. If the player wins, the next level is started instantly. If the player loses, a special boss fight against Psy-Crow must be won in order to progress to the next level. Other variations in gameplay occur over the course of the game as well, such as a competitive bungee jumping and fighting level, and an underwater maze that must be traversed both within a time limit and without crashing too many times. Plot: Jim is a normal earthworm, until a special super suit falls from the sky and allows him to operate much like a human, with his worm part acting as a head and the suit acting as arms, body, and legs. Jim's task is twofold. He must evade the game's many antagonists, who are after him because they want the suit back, and also rescue and protect Princess What's-Her-Name from them. The game plays out with Jim eluding and defeating all enemies, and saving Princess What's-Her-Name. However, not only does she not return Jim's affection, but she is also crushed by the flying cow that was launched at the beginning of the game. Development: Playmates Toys, finding success with the license for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, want to start their own franchise. Inspired by the success of the Sonic the Hedgehog series with Sonic the Hedgehog and Sonic the Hedgehog 2, they decided that they wanted to start the franchise as a video game, a rare approach at the time. From there, the game's design actually started with Doug TenNapel's simple sketch of an earthworm that he presented to Shiny Entertainment. Impressed, David Perry and the rest of Shiny bought the rights to Earthworm Jim from TenNapel, and started developing the game. From there, TenNapel would work on doing the game design, creating level ideas, and voicing Jim's character, while Perry and the other programmers created other characters and game mechanics. The game's crazy atmosphere, world, and characters was due to the fact that the company has previously always been restricted to doing licensed games, like 7-Up's Cool Spot, where they had to conform to the other company's preset limitations. In that respect, the game was actually created as a satire of platform video games at the time. For instance, Princess What's-Her-Name was a parody of how so many video games had throwaway female characters to be saved. Release: the original version was released for the Sega Mega Drive Genesis in 1994. A version for the Super Nintendo was released shortly after the original, in 1995, and is largely the same as the Genesis version. The Super Nintendo version has altered graphics, with alternate backgrounds and special effects, but lacked some sound effects and one of the levels from the Genesis version. The reason for the Genesis version having the extra level was that the Genesis version was more easily compressed and had the room for the bonus level. The game also had a MS-DOS port bundled with Earthworm Jim 2 titled as Earthworm Jim the Volcano Worms with much smoother graphics but lacked the level Intestinal Distress. The game's special edition was released for the Sega Genesis add-on, the Sega CD, and Windows 95. It was based off the Genesis version, contained all of its levels, plus some extended section to the levels and a single completely new level, titled Big Brute, a new remixed CD audio soundtrack, as well as around 1,000 more frames of in-game animation. These versions were also the only ones to contain alternate endings when winning on the easy, or hard difficulties, in which a narrator rambles on about many facts about worms or congratulates the player in a similar absurd manner respectively. Another special edition of the game was released exclusively through the Sega Channel, a subscription game service for the Sega Genesis, for a contest dubbed the Great Earthworm Jim Race. This version included a secret room which, when reached by the first 200 players, would display a password and a toll-free telephone number. Those that called the number were awarded special prizes. Eurocom ported a compressed and scaled-down version for the Game Boy. It was hindered by the lack of color, lack of graphical detail due to both processor and small screen size, choppy animations, and a lack of buttons, which made it hard to control. This version was also ported to the Game Gear, which included color graphics, but still suffered from all of the other problems of the Game Boy version. A direct port of the Game Gear version was also brought to the Sega Master System, but only in Brazil. However, only has 4 levels, and the boss in What the Heck? Is missing. Years later, the Super Nintendo version would be ported to the Game Boy Advance as well. Despite the extra power of the Game Boy Advance, this version still ran very poorly, with poor animation, missing details, and was widely criticized. The game was re-released digitally on a number of platforms in the late 2000s as well. The original Genesis version was released through Wii's Virtual Console service in Europe on October 3, 2008. And in North America on October 27, 2008. Gameloft also released it digitally on a number of mobile handheld platforms. It was released as a download for the Nintendo-sized DSiWare, which is also downloadable on a Nintendo 3DS system. It was a port of the Genesis original, but did not contain the Who Turned Out the Lights? Secret level. The only new addition was an extra minigame that involved the player using the system's camera on their own face, in order to mimic the same faces Jim would make on screen. Gameloft released an iPhone version of the game, which featured overhauled and smoothed graphics, a remixed soundtrack, and touch-screen controls. High-definition remake. A high-definition remake of the game, titled Earthworm Jim HD, was released for Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network in 2010. It featured a comic book-like introduction, 3 new computer-themed bonus levels, and a 4-player multiplayer mode with special levels based on already existing ones. The extended version of the new Junk City level from the special edition is also included, but the Big Brute, and Who Turned Out the Lights? Levels are not present. Reception for the game was very positive. Earthworm Jim was awarded Best Genesis Game of 1994 by Electronic Gaming Monthly, and Famicom Zarshin scored the Super Famicom version of the game a 30 out of 40. Earthworm Jim was rated the 114th best game made on a Nintendo system in Nintendo Power's Top 200 Games list. The game has been noted for its fluid animation, featuring a hand-drawn style that was unusual for 16-bit releases. With regard to the game's overall appeal, a review from GameZone stated back when platformers were the king of genres, Earthworm Jim made its presence known as the cool kid on the block by appealing to many demographics. obtaining a moderate difficulty level and establishing itself with stylish humor. Earthworm Jim was a financial and critical success for Interplay and Shiny Entertainment. Even though I feel the sequel is the best of the series, the original still is able to stand out on its own. The review also went on to praise the soundtrack from Tommy Tallarico as well. IGN recommended it on WiiWare as recently as 2011 as a game to play during software droughts for the system. However, later Gameloft remakes of the games received mixed reviews. Reception for the 2010 remake, Earthworm Jim HD, less positive. IGN and GameSpot both felt that the surreal art style and animation stood the test of time, but felt that some gameplay aspects and controls felt dated in comparison to modern platformers. Similarly, the iPhone version of the game was criticized for its sloppy controls, mostly due to being touchscreen only. Legacy, a sequel, Earthworm Jim 2, was released in 1995. It was released in the same manner as the original. First on the Sega Genesis, and then ported to many other systems. It too was generally well received. Two further games, Earthworm Jim 3D for the Nintendo 64 and PC, and Earthworm Jim, Menace to the Galaxy for the Game Boy Color, were produced in 1999. However, they were developed without the involvement of Shiny Entertainment and were mostly met with negative reviews. An enhanced remake, Earthworm Jim by Atari, was planned for a 2007 release for the PlayStation Portable, but was ultimately cancelled. The game also inspired non-video game products, such as the Earthworm Jim television series, a comic book series, and a line of action figures. Earthworm Jim is playable as a standard character in Clay Fighter 63, and as a secret character in the Sculptor's Cut version of that game. References. External links, Activision page, Kinisoft Development Corporation page, Earthworm Jim at Moby Games, Earthworm Jim at GameFAQs,